Did you know the rocket that carried Neil Armstrong to the moon was designed by men who had built missiles for Hitler? The Saturn V, 363 feet tall, the most powerful machine ever flown, was the crowning achievement of American engineering, a monument to what the free world could build. And the man who led its design had spent the previous war aiming rockets at London. His name was Wernher von Braun. He wore an SS uniform. His V-2 rockets killed more than 9,000 civilians in Britain and Belgium. The missiles were assembled in an underground factory by prisoners who were worked until they dropped and then replaced with fresh bodies from a camp called Dora. More than 20,000 of those prisoners died building von Braun's rockets. After the war, the United States didn't put him on trial. It gave him a new identity, a new passport, and eventually a medal from the President of the United States. He wasn't the only one. Between 1945 and 1959, the U.S. secretly brought more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians into the country. Hundreds of them with active Nazi Party membership, SS records, and direct links to war crimes. This is the story of how it happened, why the government covered it up, and what the declassified files actually say. In central Germany, in the Harz Mountains, there's a tunnel complex carved into solid rock. The Nazis called it Mittelwerk, the Central Works. It was an underground city, 1.2 million square feet of factory floor, and inside, prisoners from the Dora concentration camp assembled V-2 rockets around the clock. They slept in the tunnels. They ate in the tunnels. They were hanged in the tunnels, from cranes, in full view of the assembly line, for sabotage, or for working too slowly, or for no reason at all. An estimated 52,000 prisoners passed through Dora. Roughly 20,000 died from starvation, from exhaustion, from execution, from the ammonia gas that filled the tunnels when rocket fuel leaked. The death toll at Mittelwerk was higher than the number of people killed by the rockets it produced. Wernher von Braun didn't run the camp, but he walked the factory floor. He selected prisoners for skilled labor. He was there. So was Arthur Rudolph, von Braun's operations director. Rudolph would later admit to witnessing prisoners being hanged. He continued working. So was Kurt Debus, who would later become the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Launch Complex 39, where Apollo 11 lifted off, was built under his supervision. When Allied forces closed in, von Braun and his team surrendered to the Americans. Not because they'd had a change of heart, because they knew the Soviets would execute them and the Americans would hire them. They were right. In the final months of the war, American intelligence launched a program with an innocuous name, Operation Overcast. Later, it was renamed Operation Paperclip, named for the paperclips intelligence officers attached to the personnel files of scientists they wanted to recruit. The logic was simple. The Germans had spent 6 years building the most advanced weapons on Earth. The V-2 was the first human-made object to reach space. Jet engines, guided missiles, aerodynamic designs that were years ahead of anything the Allies had. Those scientists were the real spoils of war. And if the Americans didn't get them, the Soviets would. So the U.S. raced to extract German scientific talent before the Red Army arrived. Scientists were located, interrogated, and offered contracts. Some were taken within weeks of Germany's surrender. Others were smuggled out via circuitous routes to avoid detection. But there was a problem, a legal one. President Truman had issued an explicit order. No Nazi Party members, no war crime suspects, no one with an active Nazi or militaristic record was to be brought to the United States under this program. The order was clear. It was also ignored. The agency responsible for vetting the scientists, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA, systematically falsified personnel files to get around Truman's directive. Nazi Party membership numbers were erased. SS service records were removed. Arrest warrants were buried. Reports from Allied investigators documenting war crimes were locked in classified archives and replaced with sanitized summaries. The JIOA didn't just bend the rules, it fabricated a parallel paper trail. Personnel dossiers that looked clean, attached to men who were anything but. Von Braun's SS membership? Removed. Arthur Rudolph's role at Mittelwerk? Minimized. Kurt Debus's wartime activities? Redacted. The scientists were given new identities, new histories, and new lives in the United States. They arrived at military bases, were processed through hastily arranged immigration procedures, and gradually dispersed to research facilities across the country. By 1950, hundreds of former Nazi scientists and engineers were living in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the U.S. Army's rocket program. They called themselves the Huntsville Germans. Their neighbors had no idea. The payoff came in 1969. The Saturn V rocket, designed in Huntsville under the direction of Wernher von Braun and his team of former Nazi engineers, carried 3 American astronauts to the moon. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, the world watched. It was America's greatest moment. A triumph of science, will, and the human spirit. And it was built, in significant part, by men who had worn swastikas. Von Braun became a national hero. He appeared on television. He met with presidents. Walt Disney made films about his vision for space exploration. He was given the National Medal of Science. The narrative was clean. Brilliant German scientist, recruited after the war, helped America win the space race. The Mittelwerk tunnels were never mentioned in the press releases. Neither were the 20,000 dead. The reckoning came decades later, slowly and incompletely. In 1984, the Office of Special Investigations, the Justice Department's Nazi hunting unit, confronted Arthur Rudolph. By then, Rudolph was a retired NASA legend. He had received the agency's highest honor. He had helped put men on the moon. But investigators had found his wartime record, his role at Mittelwerk, his direct involvement in the use of slave labor. Facing war crimes charges, Rudolph was given a choice: leave the United States voluntarily and renounce his citizenship, or face prosecution. He left. He died in Germany in 1996, still collecting his NASA pension. Kurt Debus was never investigated. The launch complex he built still stands at Cape Canaveral. Werner von Braun died in 1977, celebrated as an American hero. His obituaries mentioned the V-2, usually in passing. His SS membership was noted as a historical footnote. The underground factory was not mentioned at all. The declassification of the original JIOA documents began in the 1990s, after the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. What emerged was a portrait of systematic deception, officials manufacturing clean records for men they knew had blood on their hands. The moon landing was one of humanity's greatest achievements. It proved what we can build when we commit ourselves to something impossible. But the rocket that got us there was designed by men who had built weapons of terror. The knowledge they brought was genuine. The crimes they committed were real. And the government that hired them decided, consciously, systematically, that winning the Cold War was more important than justice. The files sat classified for nearly 50 years. Some secrets don't stay buried because someone finally asks the right question. These stayed buried because no one in power wanted to ask at all.